Good evening, seventh graders. It is time for Chapter 4, Story Time with Mr. Pitts. I have to say, I didn't enjoy Chapter 3 as much as I had hoped. I feel like hopefully Chapter 4 is going to give us some Easter eggs and surprises like Chapters 1 and 2 did. So hopefully you'll enjoy Chapter 4 and keep up with your work and do a great job. Leader had summoned Maddie for message running. Maddie enjoyed going to Leader's home place because of the stairs. Others had stairs, though Maddie and the blind man did not, but Leader's stairs were circular, which fascinated Maddie. He liked going up and down and because of the books. Others had books too. Maddie had a few school books, and he often borrowed other books from the library so he could read stories to the blind man in the evenings, a time they both enjoyed. But Leader's home place, where he lived alone, had more books than Maddie had ever seen in one place. The entire ground floor, except for the kitchen to one side, was lined with shelves, and the shelves were filled with volumes of every sort. Leader allowed Maddie to lift down and look at any one he wanted. There were stories, of course, not unlike the ones he found in the library. There were history books as well, like those he studied at school. The best ones were filled with maps that showed how the world had changed over centuries. Some books had shiny pages that showed paintings of landscapes unlike anything Maddie had ever seen, or of people costumed in odd ways, or of battles. And there were many quiet painted scenes of a woman holding a newborn child. Still others were written in languages from the past and from other places. Leader laughed wryly when Maddie had opened to a page and pointed to an unknown language. "It's called Greek," Leader said. "I can read a few words, but in a place of my childhood we were not allowed to learn such things. So in my spare time, I have Mentor come and help me with languages." "But," Leader sighed, "I have so little spare time. Maybe when I'm old I will sit here and study. I'd like that, I think." Maddie had replaced the book and run his hand gently over the leather bindings of the ones beside it. "If you weren't allowed to learn," he asked, "why did they let you bring the books?" Leader laughed. "You've seen the little sled," he said. "In the museum?" "Yes, my vehicle of arrival. They have made such a thing of it. It's almost embarrassing. But it's true that I came on that sled, a desperate boy half dead. No books. The books were brought to me later. I have never been as surprised in my life as I was the day those books arrived." Maddie had looked around at the thousands of books. In his own arms, and Maddie was strong, he could have carried no more than 10 or 12 at a time. "How did they come to you?" "A river barge." Suddenly, there it was. Huge wooden crates aboard, and each one was filled with books. Until that time, I had always been afraid. A year had passed, then 2. But I was still afraid. I thought they would still be looking for me, that I would be recaptured and put to death, because no one had ever fled my community successfully before. It was only when I saw the books that I knew that things had changed. I was free, and that back there, where I had come from, they were rebuilding themselves into something better. The books were kind of forgiveness, I think. "Do you think you could have gone back?" Maddie said. "Was it too late? Had Forrest given you warnings?" "No, but why would I go back? I found a home here, the way everyone has. It's why we have the museum, Maddie, to remind us of how we came, and why, to start fresh, begin a new place from what we had learned and carried from the old." Today, Maddie admired the books, as he always did in Leader's home place, but he didn't linger to touch or examine them. Nor did he stop to admire the staircase with its intricate risers of crafted, polished wood that ascended in a circle to the next level. When Leader called, "Up here, Maddie," he bounded up the stairs to the second floor, into the spacious room where Leader lived and worked. Leader was at his desk. He looked up from the papers in front of him and smiled at Maddie. "How's the fishing?" Maddie grinned and shrugged. "Not too bad. I caught 4 yesterday." Leader laid his pen aside and leaned back in his chair. "Tell me something, Maddie. You and your friend are out there a lot fishing, and you've been doing it for a long time, since you came to village as a little boy. Isn't that so?" I don't remember exactly how long. I was only about this high when I came. Matty gestured with his hand, placing it level with the second button of his own shirt. 6 years, Leader told him. You arrived 6 years ago. You've been fishing for all that time. Matty nodded, but he stiffened. He was wary. It was too soon for his true name to be bestowed, he thought. Surely it was not going to be Fisherman. Was that why Leader had called him here? Leader looked at him and began to laugh. Relax, Matty. When you look like that, I can almost read your mind. Don't worry, it was only a question. A question about fishing. Fishing's a thing I do just to get food or to fool around. I don't want it to turn into anything more. Matty liked that about Leader. You could say what you wanted to him, that you could tell him what you felt. I understand. You needn't worry about that. I was asking because I need to assess the food supply. Some are saying there are fewer fish than there once were. Look here, what I've been writing. He passed the paper over to Matty. There were columns of numbers, lists headed salmon and trout. Matty read the numbers and frowned. It might be true, he said. I remember at first I would pull fish after fish from the river. But you know what, Leader? What? Leader took the paper back from Matty and laid it with others on his desk. I was little then, and maybe you don't remember this because you're older than I am. Leader smiled. I'm still a young man, Matty. I remember being a boy. Matty thought he noticed a brief flicker of sadness in Leader's eyes, despite the warm smile. So many people in village, including Matty, had sad memories of their childhoods. What I meant was, I remember all the fish, the feeling that they would never end. I felt that I could drop my line in again and again and again, and there would always be fish. Now there aren't. But Leader looked at him and waited. Things seem more when you're little. They seem bigger, and distances seem farther. The first time I came here through forest, the journey seemed forever. It does take days, Matty, from where you started. Yeah, I know, it still does take days, but now it doesn't seem as far or as long, because I'm older and bigger, and I've gone back and forth again and again, and I know the way, and I'm not scared. It seems shorter. Leader chuckled. And the fish? Well, there don't seem to be as many, but maybe it's just that I was a little boy back then when the fish seemed endless. Leader tapped the tip of his pen on his desk as he thought. Maybe so, he said after a moment. He stood. From a table in the corner of the room, he took a stack of folded papers. Messages, Matty asked. Messages. I'm calling a meeting. About fish? No, I wish it were just about fish. Fish would be easy. Matty took the stack of message papers he would be delivering. Before he turned to the staircase to leave, he felt compelled to say fish aren't ever easy. You have to use just the right bait and know the right place to go. And then you have to pull the line up at just the right moment, because if you don't, the fish can wiggle right off your hook, and not everybody's good at it, and... He could hear Leader laughing, still, when he left. It took Matty most of the day to deliver all the messages. It was not a hard task. He liked the harder ones better, actually, when he was outfitted with food in a carrying pack and sent on long journeys through forest. Although he hadn't been sent to it in almost 2 years. Matty especially liked trips that took him back to his former home, where he could greet his boyhood pals with a somewhat superior smile and snub those who'd been cruel to him in the past. His mother was dead, he had been told. His brother was still there, and looked at Matty with more respect than he ever had in the past. But they were strangers to each other now. The community where he had lived was greatly changed and seemed foreign, though less harsh than he remembered. Today he simply made his way around village, delivering notice of the meeting that would be held the following week. Reading the message himself, he could understand Leader's questioning about the supply of fish, and the concern and worry that Matty had felt from him. There had been a petition, signed by a substantial number of people, to close village to outsiders. There would have to be a debate and a vote. It had happened before, such a petition. We voted it down just a year ago, the blind man reminded Matty when the message had been read to him. There must be a stronger movement now. Well, there's still plenty of fish, Matty pointed out, and the fields are full of crops. The blind man crumpled the message and dropped it into the fire. It's not the fish or the crops, he said. They'll use that, of course. They argued dwindling food supply last time. It's not enough housing? It's more than that. I can't think of a word for it. Selfishness, I guess. It's creeping in. Matty was startled. Village had been created out of the opposite, selflessness. He knew that from his studies and from hearing the history. Everyone did. But in the message, I could have read it to you again if you hadn't burned it. It says the group who wants to close the border is headed by Mentor, the school teacher. The blind man sighed. Give the soup a stir, would you, Matty? Obediently, Matty moved the wooden ladle around in the pot and watched beans and chopped tomatoes churn in a thick mixture as it simmered. Thinking still of his teacher, he added, He's not selfish. I know he isn't. That's why it's puzzling. He welcomes everyone to the school, even new ones who have no learning, who can't even speak properly. Like you when you came, the blind man said with a smile. It couldn't have been easy, but he taught you. He had to tame me first, Matty acknowledged, grinning. I was wild, wasn't I? Seer nodded. Wild, but Mentor loves teaching those who need it. Why would he want to close the border? Matty? What? His mentor traded, do you know? Matty thought about it. It's school vacation now, so I don't see him as often, but I stop by his home place now and then. He didn't mention Jean, the widowed schoolteacher's daughter. I haven't noticed anything different in his household. No gaming machine, he added, laughing a little. But the blind man didn't chuckle in reply. He sat thinking for a moment, and then he said in a worried voice, It is much more than just a gaming machine. Well, this chapter does appear to have a few Easter eggs in it now that I go through it. I see a lot of regrets and a lot of remorse. Is Jonas, who we know leader is now Jonas, Jonas probably thinks back to his life in his former place. It appears that he, Thomas, Kira, Joe, and now Matty, they all have a lot in common. They've all lost family. They've all had to give up many things that were important to them. And there's really no looking back for any of them. I do find it kind of interesting that Matty at least did get to go back and see his brother, who appears to respect him, but they really, at this point, have no relationship. Jonas, obviously, after leaving his community, he never saw mother, father, or sister ever again. Whether you even consider their mother, sister, father, that's for you to decide based on the giver that we read. Speaking of fishing, one of the papers I did grade today was Camden Axe, period 7/8, and he has acclaimed the name Fisher for the village. So it's okay, Matty. You do not have to be the village fisherman. Camden Axe will be our fisher. It's all good. The end of the chapter here talks about the border being closed. Now, I don't know if somebody is trying to take Jonas's job of leader away or if there's something more sinister going on. I'm hoping chapter 5 is going to give us an idea as to what it is the seer seems to realize is going to happen by this decision about the border either remaining open with others or shutting down. Last but not least, obviously, as I said, I'm reading the story with you guys. I'm not reading it ahead of time. I find it interesting that mountains of books just showed up on a boat. And if you remember back to the giver, all of those books that Jonas saw for the first time belong to the giver. So I'm assuming something has happened to the giver. Maybe he died. Who knows? But it appears that that community changed a lot for the better, it sounds like. And the books, for whatever reason, were loaded and sent down the river to Jonas. And he now got to keep these books, which is an absolute plethora of knowledge. And he appears at least willing to share it, which is very different than what happened to his childhood community, where no one could read the books or have the knowledge other than the giver. So the giver and the leader, they both seem to have very, very different roles in their communities. I hope that perhaps in the future we find out what happened to the giver. I think that'd be very exciting if we know what happened to him in his ending in the story. Good luck with the questions. Please do your best. And tomorrow we'll read chapter 5 together. Thanks. Good night.